Welcome to our super podcast for Swab Radio, the first radio station of Swab Radio Art Sphere. Let's open our third podcast by exploring Southeast Asian art dynamics, focusing on new digital art formats and the integration of artificial intelligence. We investigate how these innovations can fill gaps in traditional resources and expand artistic expression in challenging contexts. We would like to welcome Mario Pena, Chief Operating Officer of Safecreative. He's a former computer technician, open culture, and free speech advocate with well over 20 years' experience in copyright issues. He's in charge of daily operations of Safecreative and Safestamper, directly reporting to the CEO. During the last 2 years, he has been able to help raise Safecreative user base from a few to a staggering amount of 400,000 creators worldwide with over 5 million registrations. Safecreative is now for the most important private and online technology-based registration service. He has lectured at Meet in Boston on online registry, at the Commonia event in Amsterdam, and has been a speaker at other events on copyright issues and business model related to digital content. This is the question we would like to propose you. In digital art and artificial intelligence, the issue of intellectual property can become even more complex when it comes to collaboration between artists, technologists, and other stakeholders. How does Safecreative facilitate copyright management in collaborative and multinational context, ensuring fairness among all involved?
Well, that's actually a very difficult question for several reasons. Maybe the first thing that we have to understand here is that there is still there's going to be a lot of litigation around copyrights related to AI-generated content, basically because at this moment, there is not enough transparency related to what kind of items of creations are being used to train these AIs. And also the pure concept of training those AIs is something that sparks a question about if that training is different from what we do as people who create, how creators behave or how creators learn themselves to do stuff, because they also access previous works, both in the public domain and not. So one of the big questions that needs to be answered here is if that accessing to loads, thousands or billions of contents is rightful or not, if there is some possible infringement or not. And if we find that there is infringement or there could be infringement, the next question is then when creators access other people's works, is there infringement also? There needs to be some compensation. So those questions have to be taken very carefully and considered with the possibly repercussions in the future. That's one of the things. The second thing, which I believe is very important also, is to clarify if those works created using AIs do have copyrights themselves. I mean, not the works themselves, but the people who create those works using AI. Do they have copyrights? And that's another big question that's going to be something that one of the big proposals is being taken by the United States through the U.S. Copyright Office, but also the European Commission is encouraging to clarify the situation. And this is because there are different types of ways that AI is being used. It can be used by a random person in the street who, without art knowledge, simply typing a prompt and creating something, and there is unlikely to be considered that there's any copyrights. But on the other side, we have knowledge because we have been talking with some creators that they use the AI as a tool from the very beginning, and some of them for years. They have been using for years. And they use it as a tool for both editing or finding inspiration or having a draft or something that they will develop later. So there is different degrees in which the AI is being used in in creative works. So in that case, in the case that we find works with a lot of interaction with the author and the AI, that's very difficult to say there is not copyright, there is no rights. If there are moral rights, that's a more difficult question, but maybe patrimonial rights is something that could be answered easier because it will pretty much depend on the settings of the company with the AI. So, and what we do in Safecreative first is we allow creators to both certify the creative process. They can add all the information from how they have been creating the work. Also, they can include any information related to AI. And when they finish the work, they can declare if the work is being used with an AI or not, or in part. That information will be of help in the future once all the litigation is over and we decide if there are copyrights or not. Then we will need to go back and find out how those works were created. So we are all in favor of honesty, of transparency, of having people to be able to declare and to specify how they create the creations.
Okay, thank you so much for that. It's a critical point, I think, AI in this contemporary moment, I think. So thank you for your reply. I think it's a pretty good reply to that.
You're welcome.
So let's now introduce Alfonse Chiu. I think it's correct, the pronunciation of your surname. Perfect. He's a writer, an artist and curator working at the intersection of text, space, and moving images. His practice investigates the imaginaries of capital and ideologies shaped by media, infrastructures, and networked economies. He's the founder of the Center for Urban Mythologies, CUM, an artistic and critical research platform that explores narratives of the urban condition to propose larger situated critiques of capitalism and the Anthropocene position from the Global South. He was the full 2021 Influx magazine fellows and the associate curator of DEC. As a freelance journalist and curatorial researcher, he has worked with the Department of Architecture at the National University of Singapore and Singapore Heritage Society on projects related to urban development and heritage conservation. His texts have been published internationally in publications such as Hyperallergic, Ocula and Art Basel Editorial, and commissioned by institutions such as the Asian Film Archive, the Arsenal Institute for Film and Video Art, and the Sarja Architecture Triennale Research Initiative. After that presentation, here's our question for you. How do you see the evolution of the contemporary art market in Southeast Asia, and what are the most relevant trends you are observing? This is the first question, and then I got a second one.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that. I think contemporary art development in Southeast Asia now is at a very, very exciting point. So I think it's been reflected in a lot of global reports, not just in contemporary art, but also just looking at market developments and also economic and population developments of Southeast Asia, that it is one of the world's fastest growing demographics. And of course, this is something that cuts across different industries, not just contemporary art, but also, different kinds of industrial production in terms of population growth, in terms of labor forces. And I think this larger trend also then points to how visual culture, this is how I want to frame contemporary art as being part of visual culture and entertainment, media, and culture has been evolving. So specific to contemporary art, I think that what's most exciting is that we are seeing a new generation of a collector base, because we are also seeing the kind of opening up and the risk-taking of traditional collectors while taking on collection of more experimental and challenging works, as well as, of course, seeing the rise of young collectors who are beginning to gain their first taste of art, and also seeing how art can fit within not just, their investment portfolios, but also very much their life, and seeing how it can be integrated very much into lifestyles instead of, the more traditionally elitist or class-based imaginaries of art being exclusively for the super rich. So I think this is a very welcoming trend in terms of contemporary art development. And I think it is also very welcoming to see transitions, for example, in the increase of collectors-led private museums and private collections, and also seeing more regional conversations within Southeast Asia between national institutions and national collections between countries that say Indonesia, Thailand, or Singapore, where there's really this idea of not just promoting your national landscape, but also very much a regional landscape. And I think, these are all trends and happenings, occurrences, and phenomena that is a very good sign for how contemporary art is developing, and also the audience, the consumer for it, is also increasing. So, yeah, I can go all day about this. So I think this is a good small end now.
Thank you. The second one actually is about what is the role of cultural institutions and art galleries in promoting contemporary art from this region globally.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think this is such an important question because I think this question is also based on the need to talk about the different landscapes and infrastructures for support for contemporary art and visual culture. So to give a little bit of context, even though industry, economies, and demographics are growing rapidly in Southeast Asia, apart from a select few, there aren't actually a lot of official public institutions that support contemporary art. So unlike, let's say, in Europe, and also we see, for example, the difference in landscapes between North Europe and, let's say, Mediterranean Europe, there's a very diverse, but there's also a very big landscape for public institutions that support cultural activities. So, for example, the developments of museums such as Magba in Barcelona or Reina Sofia in Madrid, they're all very critical to the development of artists' careers and across different stages. And this is, of course, also matched by the different regional art museums and art spaces and foundations. So I'm of course in Barcelona. You also have Fabrica y Cortes, and then if you go to Valencia, then you have Bombas Hen in conversation with larger state-led institutions such as IVAM. So I think in the context of Southeast Asia, things are a little trickier because there are not a lot of public funding. So, for example, I would say the most well-funded institution in Southeast Asia is from Singapore. It is the National Gallery Singapore, which also hosts, I think, one of the world's most important collection of Southeast Asian art. But of course, we know the region cannot just be one museum in one country. So what we are seeing now, as I was mentioning earlier, is this kind of rise in private collectors and collector bases who are kind of building their presences across the landscape. So, for example, the Mayam Museum in Chiang Mai in Thailand is a very good example of a private museum, similar to, ones in Indonesia. So, this kind of different landscape allows for different kinds of support because public institutions in Southeast Asia are still very much rooted to how the state sees itself politically within the nation, but also within the region. So, if we want to say what's good about this is that there's a development of a very specific identity, but if you want to be more critical, it means that there's a lot of censorship that happens between the kind of different political ideologies. So, for example, art foundations such as the Nguyen Art Foundation in Vietnam and the developments of private spaces are very, very important to landscapes where if you're not funded by the state, you don't have any other infrastructure. And of course, this is also important to note that even public support, state funding across the different countries are also wildly uneven. The number of museums that are available are different. And even within the museum, who can take care of collections, who can collect actively, and who can curate those collections are all larger questions of ecosystem that we need to discuss. So I would say it is very, very critical, but we are still getting there in Southeast Asia. And we are also learning how to define and create different scales, different sizes, and different positions of cultural institutions, between cultivating collector bases, cultivating gallery networks for the contemporary art market, and, having more independent artist-led spaces. And I think, of course, now, as Mario raised so importantly, the idea of the digital space with the advent of digital technology and NFT Asia, which is one of those pioneering groups looking at, digital artworks in the NFT and blockchain age, was also started in Singapore. So, and then they have gone on to present works, for example, in expos in Art Dubai and elsewhere. So I think this is incredibly important to kind of consider how ecosystems are changing, not just because of economy, but also because of technologies and infrastructures, and also how governments themselves are changing, because art is always a reflection of society and, of course, also of politics and economies. Yeah.
Thank you so much to go deep into this thematic. Thank you for that. And now a question I would like to propose for you both. We would like to know which kind of relationship do you think is developing between the digitally dedicated art world and the art collecting scene?
Well, we don't have a lot of experience in the realm of collection, because we are actually now investigating the whole concept. What we created in our platform is a place to publish and to showcase the works of the people, and we are kind of, well, that's one of the reasons we are visiting so many fairs, artistic fairs, is to learn a little bit about how this actually works in the physical realm and how to translate that to the digital one. And what we see is more the perspective of the creators, what they want, what they expect from their work when they especially develop on a digital environment. And we are gathering all that information, all that knowledge, and trying to translate it in a way that can be helpful in a digital environment. And of course, the goal is to make something that can somehow facilitate the collectors to reach and find that work. But as Alfonse stated, there is a lot of innovation going on. It's changing us the way that we behave and we interact. And I have the feeling that the rules have changed really, and we have to move forward and do things in advance. And that's going to be difficult to match that need of collecting in a digital environment and matching the talent that we can find in the internet. So we hope to be able to tackle more on this in the future. And right now we are basically investigating.
Thank you. No, thank you so much for that question and to Marion's response as well. I think from my perspective, I think it's very interesting to maybe acknowledge the problem on 3 different dimensions. So the impact of digital technologies on traditional studio practices and traditional habits of collection, and then the impact of digital technology in the development of digitally based art forms. And of course, lastly, the larger idea of how digital infrastructures is impacting how we consume art and culture. So I will do maybe a little bit about all 3. I think digital technology has, surprisingly enough, maybe not affected the traditional art market, as much as we sometimes, think it is based on what magazines and a lot of editorials say. I think the painting market is still very much, is still doing pretty well. People are selling paintings, I think particularly in the contemporary art market, collectors, especially traditional collectors or collectors who are maybe a little bit older, are still very much engaged with the idea of materials and materialities. So I think there's a limit, for example, sometimes in a home or where exactly you can put a lot of different media, yes, or even digital works. So, if you have a big wall, that's where a painting can go. And so I think, then digitality comes across, the digital development comes across really in documentations and preservation, and also very much in presentation of the works by artists who, have to learn how to navigate the digital media increasingly, through their websites, through their documentation videos. And especially as we learned through pandemic, the idea of having to create this kind of virtual spaces for galleries where collectors need to be able to visualize how a physical work looks in a space before they make a decision. And I think that this is the kind of infrastructure that accompanies all industries and how it relates to the evolutions and the advancements of technology as a whole, the kind of technological landscapes. I mean, I was just talking to someone who was born after the year 2000 recently, and I'm just thinking, they don't know what a floppy disk is. They have never seen a CD before. My liver and my kidneys instantly shriveled and my knees don't work anymore. And of course, moving on from that, then there's also thinking a lot about how digital technology affects digitally mediated practices. So for example, Rhizome, which is a very important digital art institution based in New York City under the New Museum, they collect and preserve digital art, such as, web art, as well as, early video games. And of course, I think very, very recently, MoMA, also in New York City, did a massive show on video art, signals how video art changed the world. So the idea of, digitality itself is also under a lot of questioning and evolution, because what is digital 40 years ago is not the same digital now. And it also have a different logic, and it is also stored differently. So, how do we say that, say, an early video game artwork or an early video piece by Namjoon Paik is going to be so different from how we save, a piece from the late 90s from Chiang Shilia until now, when we are seeing, NFT artists or artists working specifically with the blockchain ecosystem, how do we save that? So I think it poses a very important existential question, because it also relates to how the idea of art itself is changing. And I don't think it's necessarily a good or bad thing, but we also start to see the kind of hyper abstraction of the artwork, as a financial asset, the assetization, the financialization of artworks. But to be honest, this is no different from trends from 300-400 years ago, when the Medici family are commissioning paintings of themselves to tell everyone how rich they are. So I think, this is part and parcel of, the consumptions and the movements within art. It will be critical, it will be commercial, it will be everything, because art is a method, art is a way of seeing the world. And lastly, I think what the pandemic really taught us is how much we need screens and how much we need earphones. I have listened to so many podcasts during the pandemic, sometimes in a language I don't even know, just so I can hear things. Yeah. And I think this is also impacting a lot of collecting habits, because I think I'm seeing a lot of galleries now and a lot of collectors now who sometimes collect just because they see, a very, very nice TikTok of a very, very, well shot, well placed Instagram ad, or, just an Instagram post from an artist that I've been following for a while. So I think this is also in a way how, digital technologies is kind of reshaping the idea of collection and our understanding of what owning and consuming and seeing art could be. So yeah, I think this is a very, very deep existential question of our time. So I think I just provided maybe 3 very basic entry points, but this is, a topic that can have entire books and conferences, actually many books and many conferences written about. So yeah, I think those are just some thoughts I have.
Thank you for that. And just to add up this conversation, I think that, for example, Lou Yang's artworks that I think the winner of the Deutsche Bank awards for these years talked exactly about the things that you just mentioned. So the possibility to combine the spirituality, for example, and the high technologies, and the possibility to live between the two worlds, the real world and the world of the internet. So perfect. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for your responses and for participating in Art Super Podcast for Swab Radio. Stay tuned for the next podcast dedicated to the world of contemporary art, culture, and conscious collecting.